Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Authors Interview Series. I am Roberto Vivona. I'm the social media editor for Small Business Economics. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Anna Brattström, professor at the University of St. Andrews Business School, and by Karl Wennberg, professor at the Stockholm School of Economics. Anna, Karl, welcome to the interview series.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Professor Brattström and Professor Wennberg are among the editorial team, along with Marianne Brasu, Rick Hunt, and Christian Sandstrom, of the freshly published special issue in Small Business Economics entitled The Emergence and Impact of the Entrepreneurship Industry. I will start with the first question to Anna. Could you briefly define what you mean with the entrepreneurship industry?
It's a metaphorical concept that captures the idea that entrepreneurship, the way that is developed in the past 15 years or so, is not only the business activity of pursuing opportunities and creating organizations around them, but rather a whole industry has emerged around entrepreneurship. And with that emergence of an industry, you would also have actors that specialize both in the supply and the demand side of entrepreneurship. Actors that specialize maybe not in building businesses, but facilitating or helping or pushing, nudging, encouraging others to build businesses. And with that development of entrepreneurship, you also create a demand for it in itself. Instead of just entrepreneurs doing their things, you all of a sudden you have an industry with supply and demand side dynamics to it. Similar, like the tourism industry has sort of organized tourism across the world, the entrepreneurship industry is now emerging and organizing entrepreneurship. And this term was really coined a few years ago by Rick Hunt and Kiefer in a really nice paper where they sort of introduced this concept and did a very good job in defining it and also trying to put some numbers on how big this entrepreneurship industry really has become in the past decade.
That's great. And Karl, maybe would you like to elaborate a bit more of who are the actors and what kinds of infrastructures belong to this entrepreneurship industry and what logics also belong to that?
Yes. So this analogy, which Anna talks about, is really driven by research curiosity in the emerging domain. And during the past decades, we have seen vastly growing domains of advisors, public and private support organization, but also clubs, associations, etc., predicting, encouraging, and to some extent producing new entrepreneurial endeavors. This has really been sort of the empirical motivation behind our call for papers and this now newly released special issue, that because of this growing domain, research has some role in scrutinizing, studying, theorizing on both the causes for this increasing interest, but also the impact of these actors. What do they do and how? What are the outcomes of encouraging, supporting various types of entrepreneurial endeavors, both for individuals and teams that are supported by these organizations, but also for regions and society at large.
And I will ask this next question to Anna first, but I will also like then follow up by Karl. What do you think the framing of entrepreneurship industry, framing entrepreneurship as an industry would bring in respect to earlier concepts, and what can we capture with this new framing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I see it as as a lens, as an interpretative lens that we can put on an empirical phenomena to understand it better. And another interpretative lens that has become very important in the last year is that of entrepreneurship as ecosystems where different species coexist and are independent of each other and they grow sort of in an organic way. And that's one way of viewing the context for entrepreneurship. But by calling it or naming it an industry, that helps us see other aspects of that ecosystem, how in its current form, it's not only actors that coexist and co-evolve in an intricate system, but it's really a much more organized industry where you have both supply and demand side actors that explicitly tries to organize the social context in which entrepreneurship occurs. And I think that with different interpretative lenses, we can understand empirical phenomena in different ways. And for me, seeing this as an industrial system helps to see aspects of entrepreneurship as it's being pursued today that would not be uncovered by just calling it an ecosystem, for example.
Karl, do you have any other follow-up on this?
You could perhaps elaborate on these two terms. Industry, which is consistent of supply and demand. In earlier academic work looking at ecosystems and entrepreneurial support organizations, researchers have taken an interest in focal organizations, new ventures, individual entrepreneurs, etc. And to the extent that those ventures and individuals are supported in various ways by these kind of exogenous actors and forces that may vary across regions, universities, and contexts. What the entrepreneurship industry focus does is to endogenize those exogenous actors into a system where we think of both supply of entrepreneurial individuals or individuals interested in entrepreneurship, but also the demand for entrepreneurial endeavors. And that demand can be financial, but it can also be social, institutional, and moral, in the sense that entrepreneurship in many contexts are today a very much encouraged and celebrated type of activity. Going to university, most students across the engineering, medical, and social sciences will meet entrepreneurship boot camps, entrepreneurship courses, startups hubs, etc., and be exposed to this as a attractive and potentially viable career choice. At the same time, we know that entrepreneurship is very uncertain and most new ventures fail. The entrepreneurship industry really puts emphasis on these type of actors and organizations helping to co-produce entrepreneurship as an activity, and with what potential outcomes.
That's great, Karl. And I will continue with a more reflexive question to Anna. Do you think that the entrepreneurship industry, this framing of entrepreneurship, tends to favor high growth and high visibility ventures with the risk of undervaluing other types of entrepreneurship?
That's a really, really good question. I think what this industry is partly producing is an image of entrepreneurship as high growth, knowledge intensive, technology oriented. And I think this industry partly helps creating those kind of ventures, but partly it also helps creating a demand for being in that context. It even creates an oversupply of entrepreneurs who see themselves as attracted to that particular social context or that cultural ideal of entrepreneurship as something that is desirable and important for the economy. And when the industry sort of produces that cultural ideal of entrepreneurship as a solution to the grand challenges of our time, then entrepreneurship all of a sudden becomes a very attractive career choice or a very attractive activity to be associated with. And then what happens is that we have individuals and organizations who maybe do not really pursue entrepreneurship because they truly believe that the opportunity they're pursuing is groundbreaking, but more because they are very attracted to this cultural ideal of entrepreneurship as a solution to the grand challenges of our time. Meanwhile, there's, of course, a flora of entrepreneurial activities that has to do with small and medium-sized businesses that are not formed for the purpose of growth. Partly, I think part of the entrepreneurship industry also caters to that segment, and part of the entrepreneurship industry caters to social entrepreneurship, trying to promote social entrepreneurs to do what they want to do in the context of what they're doing. But I think the primary focus of this industry is really one of entrepreneurship as a solution to economic growth, to innovation, to big problems. And that's the kind of entrepreneurial ideal that is being promoted.
That's great. You actually touched upon another question that I want to ask you. Maybe you can just elaborate a quick more. And this is about the idea that if entrepreneurship becomes an industry, one critique is that maybe we are privileging commercial entrepreneurship and maybe neglecting social entrepreneurship. You already touched on this, but would you be able to elaborate a bit more on that?
I think the entrepreneurship industry glorifies or sells entrepreneurship both in commercial and social terms, to be honest. In many entrepreneurial ecosystems, you would see deliberate initiatives taken to promote social entrepreneurship. I wouldn't say that social entrepreneurship is not being privileged to the same extent. It's rather entrepreneurship being put forward as a solution to both economic and social problems.
That's perfect. And Karl, I will move to another question that emerges from the special issue. From what you write in the article, it seems that the entrepreneurship industry can reinforce some privilege about conducting entrepreneurial activities and exclude certain social groups. Would you be able to elaborate on these dynamics?
Yes. So when we conceptualize this as an industry with demand and supply side forces, the demand side forces, of course, includes universities, NGOs, and other types of actors that perhaps have no explicit goal in what types of entrepreneurship to encourage or foster, whereas others have explicit goals. For example, venture capitalists that want to have scalable ventures that they can make an exit from within 5 to 7 years, or other types of direct and indirect actors, if we think of regional politicians and others that want to foster job creation and growth, as well as universities that see entrepreneurship as a way to enhance the role of the university in terms of commercializing knowledge, and creating spin-off companies based on university innovations is one way of showing that the university is relevant and produces tangible outcomes for society. And of course, these types of functional output in terms of money generated, exits on the financial market, and jobs and business creation leads to some types of interventions and support systems that encourage specific types of entrepreneurship, often risky entrepreneurship, but sometimes, as shown in at least one of the articles in the special issue, a type of streamlined entrepreneurship, which is very commercially viable, but may not necessarily be innovative in a Schumpeterian sense.
Do you have some other follow-up on this, Anna?
Yeah, I think that for me, that is a very interesting aspect of the entrepreneurship industry and the potential outcomes of commodifying entrepreneurship in the way that this industry does. We think of entrepreneurship as a peripheral activity pursued outside actors who challenge the status quo, challenge the incumbents by virtue of being small and different. And what this entrepreneurship industry is doing is that they're streamlining and standardizing the process of entrepreneurship and really adopting entrepreneurship into a mainstream activity pursued by an ideal that is embraced by universities, incumbent organizations, broad layers of the population. And that for me is a very interesting transition, because it also, if we acknowledge that that is how a lot of entrepreneurship is being pursued today in this sort of streamlined, commodified ways, then that also changes the imperative for entrepreneurship as a disruptive force, or at least it can potentially. We don't know, because this would be sort of for future research to explore, I think. But how do our theories, our understanding of what entrepreneurship is, how entrepreneurship is pursued, and the consequences of entrepreneurship as a disruptive force in society, how does that change when entrepreneurship become a mainstream ideal that is being sort of produced almost like in a production line fashion by venture builders or venture capitals that sort of impose a very clear template for how one is supposed to do entrepreneurship?
It's quite well along the line of another theme that I've seen in the special issue, and if entrepreneurship is increasingly mediated via this industry, What do you think are the consequences for public policy, and how should policy design change to avoid distortions in entrepreneurship?
I'm not sure that policy can always remove distortions. I think that policies also create distortions, and that's part of this framework. But I do think that policy actors need to consider that a lot of the policies and interventions pursued are really, from an entrepreneur's perspective, only part of the ecosystem in a sense, and private actors and non-commercial actors like student clubs, entrepreneurial associations, etc., are also part of this entrepreneurship industry, but in differing ways. Policies sets incentives, provide potential resources, and give directions. But commercial actors provide the lion's share of funding and also the financial incentives for various types of entrepreneurship, whereas grassroots organizations do other things, and all of these coexist. And from an entrepreneur's perspective, they are often part of the same type of framework that is used to draw research and resources from, but also to legitimize and encourage what a specific venture may wish to be achieving for itself. Potential also setting ventures on certain trajectories.
That's great. Anna, do you want to add something on that?
It's tricky being a policymaker. I think what should be acknowledged is that policy is also not free from the ideals that flourish in society. And as the entrepreneurship industry is being increasingly organized and increasingly commodified, that also has a huge impact on the solutions that policymakers envision. I think it's fundamentally interesting, for example, to follow the development of the defense tech sector that used to be run by state bureaucratic programs, and that is now sort of decentralized, and policymakers in different countries, not the least, tries to stimulate entrepreneurial activities as a solution to defense problems. And with that sort of shift, when policy becomes an actor in the entrepreneurship industry, that for good or for bad, I'm agnostic to that, but it has implications for how entrepreneurship is pursued and what innovations come forward, and also how the norms and the values and the moral reasoning that people apply as they engage in entrepreneurial activities.
I will ask you one more question to both of you. So first Anna and then Karl. What would be one open question about the entrepreneurship industry that you hope future scholars will tackle?
I think there's a fundamental question that remains to be answered around what is entrepreneurship, how is entrepreneurship pursued, and what are the implications of entrepreneurship if entrepreneurship is no longer a peripheral business activity pursued to challenge the status quo, but rather a mainstream cultural ideal that is being embraced and practiced by the mainstream. How that shapes our theories of entrepreneurial action, of entrepreneurial motivation, of implications of entrepreneurship for innovation in the economy. I think the theories that we have are not fully equipped to address that. And that for me would be the big open question that remains.
Karl.
I think that our special issue provides very interesting glimpse in specific segments and actors in what we call the entrepreneurship industry. Universities and sports associations in America and how they encourage athletes to become entrepreneurs. Venture capital and investment companies in Europe and how they coach, screen, and invest in specific companies and not others, and thereby contributing to perhaps producing a very superficial level similarity in types of businesses in specific industries. And I foresee that research can continue to scrutinize these types of actors, both from the supply side, what they are, how they act, etc., but also in terms of the demand, right? Why do they continue, and with what types of outcomes, what type of entrepreneurs are supported, and what economic or other outcomes are generated.
I will just conclude with a final question to both of you again. I will start with Karl this time. If there is one message that you would like viewers of this interview remember from this special issue, what would it be?
If there's one message, I think it is to not always look functionalistically at entrepreneurial support organizations, entrepreneurial ecosystems, venture coaches, and venture capital, but also look at the broader spectrum of these actors from the entrepreneur's perspective, because entrepreneurs adapt to this environment and are incentivized by these actors, which we think in many ways function just as an industry.
Anna, your takeaway.
Building on what Karl said, I think it's important to acknowledge too that we not only theorizing entrepreneurship in terms of psychological, team level, statistical factors that may or may not hinder people from pursuing a business opportunity, but taking a more socio-cultural approach to entrepreneurship and see it also as a cultural ideal of our time. That has implication for our entrepreneurial activities are organized. And I hope the metaphor of the entrepreneurship industry, which is really sort of originates in the writings of Hunt and Kiefer, I hope that metaphor can be helpful for seeing that at least it's been helpful for us and for the special issue.
That's great. And I thank both of you, Professor Brattström and Professor Wennberg. Thank you for joining us into this interview.
Thank you very much for having us. Thank you.